Charbs, so this year, according to Goodreads, I read 75 books. Okay, so I read 52 books and I listened to 24. Audiobooks are great. I dedicate a lot of time to this hobby, and every year I write a top 5 books I read for friends and family. This year I figured I'd make a video as well because the holidays are coming up and you can get somebody a last minute gift or buy one for yourself to read during your time off. Also, my December video never really performed well, so I figured I'd try something new. I move a lot, so that means that I read on an e-reader. This means that I can't wave around a book like all the other booktubers I've seen. Also, I need to note that this is unapologetic. I use an e-reader. I love the smell of books and the way that they feel in your hand and all that other romantic stuff. I agree with all of those arguments, but the simple reality is that I read more because I have an e-reader. Reading more is better than reading less, and that argument wins every time. So instead of waving the book around, I'll have to wave my Kindle around as I talk. Maybe I'll even try to learn how to keyframe an animation of the book cover. Is this working? A quick note here as to how the list is compiled. As you can imagine, I read a lot of art theory and art history books. I also read a lot of nonfiction as well as fiction. At the end of the day, I am an English teacher, so I professionally read stories and help others get better at reading stories too. So when I sit down to draft my top 5 of the year, I have to compare apples and oranges, nonfiction to fiction, YA to literary fiction. So what rubric could I possibly use to make a list like this? Well, I look at the list of books from this year and I consider which of those books gave me new furniture for my brain that I'm still using. Which of them gave me new thoughts or new frameworks through which I can consider the world? Which of them gave me ideas I'm still struggling with weeks or months later? That is to say that these books are going to be in no particular order. I've just been thinking about them and I'm confident I'll be continuing to think about them into the future. I am more confident of that in the following books than I am of the others that I read. Another quick note before I start is that these are the top 5 books I read this year, not the top 5 books published in 2019. Okay, let's get into it. First up is The Golden State by Lydia Kiesling. Alright, maybe it's because I used to live in Northern California, and maybe it's because I read it while I was living in Turkey, and both of these places feature heavily in this book, but it was real good. In some ways, it's a classic quest narrative of a mother trying to figure her life out by running away from her job after a particularly traumatic experience. In other ways, there isn't much classic about it. It has a really energetic prose style that sometimes feels like flow of conscious and other times feels like poetry, and often feels like both. It has a strong focus on people trying to hold on to their past. There are separatists in Northern California who want to go back to some idealized version of the US. The protagonist is holding on to her grandmother's land for no particular reason. An older woman the protagonist meets is on a trip to literally visit a location that was important to her personal history, and none of these attempts to retrieve some idealized past work out in the novel. I mean, it is obviously more complicated than that, and I'd love to chat more about it in the comments, but I need to move on. Next up is The 57 Bus by Dashka Slater. I hope that books like this are the future of journalism. It was thoroughly researched, engagingly communicated, and most importantly, it was immersed within all sides of a difficult and complicated issue, treating them all fairly. It deals with the complicated area where hate crimes meets prison reforms, and it doesn't shy away from any of the difficult conversations. All of the people in this book are treated with humanity and empathy. No one is caricatured, there are no straw man arguments presented, it's just the story of 2 kids in Oakland, a senseless act of violence and the impact of that event on their lives and their friends and family. It's a difficult topic, but it was refreshing to read a story that valued the humanity of everybody involved. As for the furniture that it left in my head, well, the headline for the central event of this book would have been "Black Man Sets a Sleeping Kid on Fire While Riding the Bus," or something like that. In fact, there were headlines like that about the event. I, like everybody else, am exposed to lots of headlines per day and lots of tweets. This book gave me a firm example of how we need more context than a simple headline to understand a situation. Next book is Normal People by Sally Rooney. Normal People follows 2 protagonists through high school and into their adult lives. The entire novel shows a shifting and conflicting power dynamic between the 2 of them. Connell, the male protagonist, for example, is popular in high school, whereas Marian struggles with her self-worth and abusive family members. Connell is poor, Marianne is well off. He struggles with showing gratitude, she has trouble advocating for herself. I can keep going, but I think you get the point. The interesting bit about this novel, other than the emotional force and energy of the thing, is that all of those power issues need to be reconciled before the novel can end. As the reader, you can feel this and you know it to be true, and as the characters themselves recognize this, they begin to shift their behavior, and the moral center of the novel is not two individuals, but the relationship itself. In this way, the book was similar to American Marriage by Tahiri Jones. That's a bonus book recommendation for you. Anyway, that idea that sometimes the moral center isn't the individual or even an outcome, but what is best for the connection between two people is interesting and difficult to explain. I hope I did an alright job of it. Next one is Future Face by Alex Wagner. It's the second nonfiction on the list. Alex Wagner, who is half Burmese and half German, kind of, uses her skills as a journalist and researcher to dig into her own heritage and looks at this past through an honest lens. First, the writing is great. She writes with wit and irony, but can seamlessly switch to an honest, journalistic tone and often a straight-up academic one. It's part social commentary, part history, and part an emotionally charged personal essay about tribalism and the skeletons in all of our past. She'll teach you about Burmese history, German history, religion, and give a thorough and critical account of all those DNA family history tests and websites all at the same time. It made me think differently about the ways we define our communities. I'd recommend reading it alongside Kwame Anthony Apaya's The Lies That Bind, Rethinking Our Identity. That's another bonus recommendation for you. And finally, the last book on this list is We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves by Karen Joy Fowler. From time to time, I come across a book that communicates something in a way that only a novel can. Like, this couldn't have been an essay on the same themes or topics. That point alone is enough to make this list. It's also the reason that what I'm about to try to do, explain what I've learned through this book, is futile. So here are a couple other reasons. First, the narrator is immediately engaging. First-person narrators should add something to the story if the author is going to use that device, and Rosemary is the beating heart of this book. She's 1 part unreliable to 9 parts heart-wrenchingly honest and self-reflective. Beyond the narrator, though, you can find a reason to love nearly every single character in this book. From the landlord to the missing brother, they all have some quality worthy of emulation and or sympathy. 2, the furniture this book put into my head is this. Researchers are impacted by what they research. Teachers are impacted by what and who they teach. Torturers are impacted by the torture they inflict. And those effects, the ways that they are impacted, are diverse and can't be cleanly articulated. Which is why this wouldn't work as an essay. Emotionally difficult situations are causes, but the effect of those causes are different and often opposite from character to character. There's a discussion in the book about research done on animals, and our narrator says, I know that the thing ostensibly being studied is rarely the thing being studied. And that's a pretty good description of this book. Ostensibly, the book is about one thing, but that's not what is being studied. There's so much more to it. A word frequently used in the book is Umwelt, which refers to the specific way each particular organism experiences the world. The book is about how we can do better to understand those particular experiences, or at least understand that we experience the world in different ways and just be cool with that. Okay, here's the real furniture that this book gave me. And it's the thing that I've been referencing in my head a number of times since reading it. The narrator's brother at one point references the mirror test. Like, can an animal look in a mirror and recognize that the image staring back is the looker? The brother proposes a test, a reverse of the mirror test. He explains it as some way to identify those species smart enough to see themselves when they look at somebody else. It's a beautiful description of empathy that can be applied to all sorts of episodes within this book and life in general. And that's it. That's my top 5 of the year. I'll put this list and a few others I read this year in the description below, but here are a few quick honorable mentions. The best sci-fi was Dodge in Hell by Neal Stephenson, a book about downloading consciousness and the potential of humanity in digital space that also addresses fake news and how technology moves faster than we're able to deal with it. Seems important. Best YA, Let Me Hear a Rhyme by Tiffany Jackson. It was better than The Hate U Give. And I liked The Hate U Give. And the best books that didn't make my top 5 but were very close were There by Tommy Orange and This Is How It Always Is by Laurie Frankel. Let me know if you've read one of these or if you end up picking one up and reading it over the holidays and want to talk about it. I love discussing books with people. Also, if you have a recommendation for me, please pass it along. Thank you for watching.